Knut, it's so great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Great to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I don't want to out you, but I'm going to out myself. I'm a retirement nerd. I love ERISA. I love all the things we do in our industry because we're trying to help other people. But you are part of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard. I wonder, before we get into alternatives and defined contribution plans, can you tell us a little bit about the Institute, what it stands for, what you do?
Absolutely. We are completing our 15th year, and we were formed because a group of advisors believed that there should be an entity, a legal entity, that exists for no other reason than to further advocacy and education around what it means to be a fiduciary. And that's what we've tried to do for the last 15 years. And so we are a single issue group, and this is the only issue that we engage in.
So suffice to say, you love ERISA then?
It is fantastic, yes. And in that line, one of our board members is Phyllis Borsey, who of course lived the ERISA for her whole professional career, and I'm honored that she's been willing to join our board and help with our efforts.
Yep. Well, very important. I want to segue. The Department of Labor recently issued a proposed rule, and I think that the press maybe got it a little bit wrong. I'm not a media guy, but I mean, they really framed it around alternative investments, but it really was, Knut, to establish a better process, I think, to select overall investments in the retirement plan. Let's start with that.
I think what you say is, I'll say it's technically correct, but I'll say that spiritually, I don't think it's correct at all, because their reason for the rule, as introduced a year ago by the executive order from the President of the United States, was to make it easier for plan sponsors to recommend alternative investments. Anyway, so that's how I'm viewing it. I think that's how a lot of people in the ERISA world are also viewing it.
Okay, so fair enough. I stand corrected. And there's been, you read the popular press again, it's all about alts in DC. So when we think of alts, we're talking, just to kind of level set, we're talking about private equity, private credit, hedge funds, real estate, direct real estate. What is it about those types of investments that maybe differ from mutual funds, collective investment trusts, or do they differ?
Well, yes, in key aspects that directly impact whether someone is able to provide a fiduciary level evaluation. And as you perfectly well know, I don't want to put a thought in your head, but four or five of those key aspects have to do with costs, have to do with opacity, have to do with liquidity, have to do with ability to evaluate and value the vehicle. And then, of course, that all comes down to risk. And the bottom line is that we are very accustomed to having the key information about a vehicle, about an investment at our fingertips in the public markets. And most individual investors are not accustomed to getting partial information at best. And so that is what differentiates alternatives, i.e. those that live in the private marketplace as opposed to the public marketplace.
So just to kind of follow up on, let me go down a stream of thought, and I'm not presupposing anything. I don't want to play the devil's advocate. I just want to ask you. So obviously, I can see why alternative managers will want to be in this space. I mean, there's trillions of dollars, there's opportunity, and we've covered that before. But the argument is that pension plans, state pension plans, corporate pension plans have allocations to these investment classes, these alternative investment classes. Does that hold up in a defined contribution structure? And where, if it does or does not, where would it fit into a DC, a 401k, a 403b, a
Well,
457b government plan?
that's a really good question. And here to me, there is a differentiation that I have not seen made in the public discussion over the last month that this rule has been out there. But, just to go back a half a step first,
Sure.
what is ERISA supposed to do? And you know the answer to this, but just to put it on the record, it's to protect the interests of participants in employee benefit plans and their beneficiaries. Period. As you full well know. And how is this supposed to happen? Through standards of conduct and responsibility of a fiduciary, which means, and again, this is not anything new, prudent, loyal, and diversifying and transparent management of retirement assets. That is the crux of it right there. And so it's important to keep in mind what is required of a plan fiduciary in order to fulfill this obligation. And what I've called a threshold issue is that because of the opacity, by itself, but when combined with the issues of liquidity, the issues of complexity, the issues of cost, it's the bottom line is that it is not possible for a plan fiduciary to make a fiduciary evaluation, to do the investigation that is required by a plan fiduciary under ERISA. So, that to me is the threshold issue that says, from a point of view of plan sponsor, it should be a matter of, we are not in a position to be able to make these valuations, so we should stay away from them. Now, what is not discussed, and this gets back to your question, I think, is that is a totally different situation than Mr. and Mrs. Smith sitting down with their personal financial planner who knows everything about the Smiths and knows about their retirement goals and is then able to say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, these alternative investments, whatever we're talking about, are more risky, are more complex, are more costly. However, if you want to take 2% of your portfolio and put it in there, I'm not going to resign the account on that basis. But as you know, that's a totally different scenario. So, it's not a matter of, should a financial advisor never talk about alternatives with their clients? No. But in the context of ERISA and a plan sponsor, there's a prima facie basis for saying that he or she is not able to do what he or she has to do as a fiduciary. Stop.
So let me, if I may just jump in, let me ask you this question. So you talk about the responsibility of the fiduciary. Oftentimes they will delegate to, they don't lose their fiduciary responsibility, but they'll delegate to a retirement plan advisor, right?
Bingo.
So they'll hire someone that's a 321 and 338. Obviously that, you read the same press I do. There's a lot of trade publications, a lot of marketing. There's going to be a deluge of people calling on plan sponsors and saying, hey, I'm from XYZ company, you should talk about this. Or advisors. What do you tell people that are going to be deluged by the marketing, by the sales, by the information that's flowing to them? How do you process it? And then how do you use your retirement plan advisor, if you have one, to sort through this information? Can you?
Well, I guess the first sort of basic point I would make is don't do anything differently than you've been doing for 5, 10, or 25 years before. And in most cases, and I think you may agree with this generalization, financial advisors have stayed away from alternatives because of the extra risk involved. Now, so I have not seen the case to all of a sudden sweep away the rationale and the experience and the views about alternatives just because the White House decided last year that that it wanted to promote alternatives. There's so that's where I start from. But then, as I said before, if on a case by case basis, the retirement couple are dead set on putting something in alternatives because for whatever reason, then under those very specific circumstances, and everything well documented from the advisor's point of view, that's I guess that to me is the way that it should be done if it's done at all.
Yeah, I look, process in our business, and you know this better than I do, process is everything. Following a right process, documenting is always the right approach. Let me close out by asking, we may have people on the show watching the show that are participants.
Yep.
Okay, and they're seeing, there's all sort, again, you read the
Yep.
same press I do. There's a little bit of hysteria, a little bit of crisis baked into these articles. But what do you do if you see this and you don't want, or you want to voice a concern or an opinion to the fiduciary? I mean, what do you do from that perspective?
I think you reach out to your plan fiduciary and say that you want to stay away from this. And if the plan fiduciary cannot reasonably guarantee that they can stay away from it, because again, as you know as well, sometimes, well, maybe more than sometimes, it's extremely difficult to dig through all this and figure out what the heck is is inside the wrapper, is inside the packaging, et cetera, such as the Wall Street Journal article, which I was focusing on, was saying. And if the plan sponsor cannot make that a reasonable affirmation that there's not going to be any alternatives in there, I would think that they would that those plan participants should do what they need to do to ensure that they don't have them in there. So,
yeah, I mean, do you remember? I remember kind of coming up in the '90s, and back then there was, before consolidation of the investment lineups, there
yeah,
were like, this was the go-go '90s or late '90s with like,
yeah,
tech funds
yeah,
and no valuations, et cetera, and they were adding funds left and right. And then you would always get someone later on when we started consolidating, you would get, a group of participants said, I want a gold fund or I want this. And then they would open a self-directed brokerage window to have access. Do you think that that is a relief valve potentially? So as a plan sponsor, and I'm not saying you don't have fiduciary responsibility, but you can provide a mutual fund window, for lack of a better term, a brokerage. And maybe
yeah.
that's a way to access these things if you know the risk and you're willing to do that. I don't know if that's possible technologically, but it seemed to me that that is a potential relief valve for this type of issue.
I think that's a really good question, and I hate to say this, but I don't have a good answer for you.
Mm-hmm.
I would not so much from a technical point of view, because I imagine that's possible, but from the legal liability of a plan sponsor, which is front and center
Yeah.
for these plans. So,
I think not to cut you off, but
no, no,
I do have to run. But this is not an issue that we will solve on day one. I think
no,
we'll have to bring you back. But I think that we've been down this road before in the industry in terms of accessing different types of asset classes. This has been a way to kind of take the pressure off, so to speak. I don't, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know the legal aspects of this, but my understanding is that less than 5% of people in a retirement plan in general use the self-directed brokerage window. It's usually for the people who kind of rattle the biggest saber.
yeah.
Knut, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for all your work at the Institute for Fiduciary Standard, for a fiduciary standard. And look, we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon, sir.
Well, thank you for having me and for covering this issue, because it's very important. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for watching. And don't forget, we're back again tomorrow morning with another great expert and another great topic. You can tune in right here Monday through Sunday at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, for all the news in one place, delivered directly to your email box. Check it out at our website.